The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Lyra Ashwood was told to leave the only home she had ever known. She stood at the edge of the Blackthorn territory, her cloak soaked through, watching the iron gates close behind her. Somewhere behind those walls was the man she had married under a full moon, the man who had promised her forever. Alpha King Damien Cade had not come to say goodbye. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself many things that night, walking alone into the dark forest, trying to believe she would survive. The elders had called her unworthy, 3 years of marriage, and she had given the pack no heir. In Veyrath, a Luna who could not carry the bloodline was seen as a broken promise, a mistake the kingdom could not afford. Damien had said nothing when the council made their decision. He had only looked at her once, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something she could not name. Then he had turned away. What the elders did not know, what even Damien did not know, was that Lyra was already carrying his children when she was cast out. She had discovered it only days before her exile, and fear had silenced her. She had heard the whispers among the pack, how rival bloodlines sometimes ended in tragedy when a new Luna wanted the throne cleared for her own children. Lyra did not know who to trust anymore. So she said nothing, and she left with her secret hidden beneath her ribs, safer there than anywhere else in that kingdom. She walked for 9 days before she reached the human town of Marrow Hollow, far past the neutral borders, where no pack held power. She sold the only jewelry she carried, the silver band Damien had given her on their wedding night, and used the money to rent a small room above a bakery. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself she would go back once she found the courage. She never found it. Not for 5 years. Her twins were born in early spring, a boy and a girl, both with a shock of dark hair, and eyes the color of warm amber, the exact shade as their father's. Lyra named them Ren and Ash, ordinary names for children who were anything but ordinary. She taught them to keep their eyes down around strangers. She taught them to control the way their bodies seemed to hum with something wild whenever they grew upset. She never told them what they were. She was afraid that if they knew, they would want to find him. Lyra built a quiet life. She worked at the bakery, then eventually ran it herself when the elderly owner passed and left it in her care, having grown fond of the young woman who worked so hard and asked for so little. The twins grew up thinking their mother had always been alone, that their father had died before they were born. It was easier that way. It hurt less that way, or so Lyra told herself on the nights she could not sleep, staring at the ceiling and remembering amber eyes that were not so different from her children's. Back in Veyrath, the kingdom had grown cold. Damien had not taken another mate, despite the council's endless pressure. He sat on his throne like a man carved from stone, ruling with precision but no warmth. The pack noticed the change in him, the way laughter had disappeared from the halls of Blackthorn Keep, the way he trained alone in the yard until his knuckles bled, rather than sit through another feast where someone might suggest he remarry. He had let her go. That was the wound that never closed. He told himself every single day that he'd had no choice, that the council's law was older than his own rule, that even a king could not simply overturn centuries of tradition on a whim, but none of that eased the guilt. He should have fought harder. He should have followed her into that forest and never come back without her. 5 years passed this way, the kingdom slowly weakening under a leaderless heart, rival packs sensing the cracks and testing the borders more each season. The council grew nervous. An alpha king without an heir was a king whose kingdom could be challenged, and Damien's refusal to remarry had become a quiet crisis no one dared speak of directly. Then came the night that changed everything. A border patrol near Marrow Hollow was ambushed by a rogue faction testing Blackthorn's weakened defenses. The fighting spilled into the edge of the human town, and Ren and Ash, now 5 years old, were caught in the chaos when a wall collapsed near the bakery. Terrified, cornered, the twins' instincts surged past anything Lyra had trained them to suppress. Their eyes flared gold in the darkness, and for one unguarded moment, their small bodies trembled with a power no ordinary child should have possessed. A Blackthorn scout, sent to investigate the disturbance, saw it happen. He said nothing to Lyra. He did not need to. He recognized those eyes instantly, the same shade he had seen on his king 100 times. He rode back to Veyrath that same night, and within hours, the entire pack knew. The exiled Luna was alive, and she had children. Children with the king's eyes. Damien heard the news standing in the middle of the throne room, and for the first time in 5 years, something cracked open in his chest that he thought had long since turned to stone. He did not wait for the council. He did not wait for an escort. He rode out that very night, alone, toward Marrow Hollow, driven by a hope he was almost afraid to feel. Lyra was closing the bakery when she saw him standing across the street, rain-soaked and breathless, exactly as she had once left him standing behind those iron gates. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. 5 years of grief and anger and unspoken love passed between them in silence, heavier than any words could have carried. "You're alive," he finally said, his voice rough, as if the words themselves hurt to release. "I had to be," Lyra answered. "Someone had to raise them." His eyes went to the door behind her, where 2 small faces peeked out, curious and cautious. Ren stepped forward first, always the braver of the 2, tilting her head as she studied the stranger, with the same amber eyes as hers. Damien sank to his knees on the wet pavement, not caring who saw a king brought low by the sight of his own children. He had missed everything, their first steps, their first words, 5 birthdays he would never get back. The weight of it nearly broke him. Lyra did not run to him. She could not. Not yet. The wound of that night at the gates was still too raw, too easily reopened. "You let them cast me out," she said quietly. "You stood there and said nothing." "I know," Damien said. "I have hated myself every day since. I told myself I had no power to stop it, but that was a coward's excuse. A king makes the law. I should have unmade it that very night." He looked up at her, rain running down his face. "I am not asking you to forgive me tonight. I am only asking you to let me try to be worthy of forgiveness." Lyra studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any trace of the man who had once promised her forever. She found him still there, buried under years of grief, but unmistakably present. "The twins do not know you," she said. "They believe their father died before they were born." "Then let me earn the truth slowly," Damien said. "Let me be a stranger who becomes something more, in their own time, at their own pace. I will not force this on them. I have already taken enough from them without ever meaning to." It was Ren, standing barefoot in the doorway, who broke the tension. "Are you lost?" she asked Damien plainly, the way only a child could ask something so simple about a matter so complicated. Damien let out a broken laugh, wiping rain from his face. "Yes," he admitted. "I have been lost for a very long time." That night, Damien did not push his way into their lives. He rented a room at the town's only inn and waited, patient in a way the old Damien never could have managed. He returned to the bakery each morning, buying bread he did not need, sitting quietly at a corner table while Lyra worked. Slowly, carefully, he let Ren and Ash grow curious about him on their own terms. He told them stories about wolves and kingdoms, careful never to say too much, letting Lyra decide when the time was right for deeper truths. Weeks passed this way before Lyra finally agreed to speak with him properly, away from the children, in the quiet of the evening after the bakery closed. They sat together at the same table Damien had claimed as his own for weeks, and for the first time since her exile, Lyra told him everything. The night she discovered she was carrying his children, her fear of what the pack might do if they knew, the long, lonely walk to Marrow Hollow, carrying a secret too dangerous to share with anyone. Damien listened without interrupting, his hands clenched tightly in his lap, absorbing every piece of pain his choices had caused. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "The laws that exiled you were wrong," he finally said. "I intend to end them, not just for you. For every mate in Veyrath, who might one day face what you faced. No one should be cast out for something they cannot control, especially not when the truth was hidden by fear the council itself created." "And the elders who pushed for my exile," Lyra asked, "what happens to them?" "They will answer for what they did," Damien said, his voice hardening into something closer to the king he was meant to be. "I have already begun gathering evidence of how far they went to protect their own influence, how they twisted tradition into a weapon rather than a guide. Justice is coming for them, Lyra, I promise you that." It took another 2 months before Lyra agreed to return to Veyrath, and even then, only on her own terms. She would not simply resume her old title as though nothing had happened. She wanted to see the old laws dismantled with her own eyes before she would call the kingdom home again. Damien agreed to every condition without hesitation, grateful simply for the chance to prove himself worthy of a second chance. The return to Blackthorn Keep was nothing like her departure. Where she had once left in shame under cover of night, she returned in daylight, her children at her side, their amber eyes catching the sunlight as they walked through gates that had once closed behind her in judgment. The pack gathered to watch, murmurs rippling through the crowd as they took in the sight of two children who so clearly carried their king's blood. Damien stood before his people and spoke the words Lyra had waited 5 years to hear. He publicly acknowledged Lyra as his true Luna, condemned the ancient fertility laws that had led to her exile, and named Ren and Ash as his rightful heirs. The elders who had orchestrated her banishment were stripped of their positions, their manipulation of pack law exposed before the entire kingdom. Some pledged loyalty to the new order out of fear. Others left Veyrath entirely, unable to face the consequences of what they had done. In the months that followed, the kingdom began to heal in ways it had not managed in years. Rival packs, who had sensed weakness in a leaderless throne, found instead a king renewed, standing firmly beside his family, the fractures in his rule mended by the return of the woman he had never stopped loving. The twins, once hidden away out of fear, grew up learning to embrace what they were, no longer forced to hide the very thing that made them extraordinary. Lyra never forgot the pain of those 5 lonely years, but she chose, slowly, to build something new, rather than remain trapped by what had been broken. Damien spent every day proving that his promise was more than words, that the man who had once let tradition take everything from her would now spend his life making certain nothing like it ever happened again. On the anniversary of the night she had once walked out through those same iron gates, Lyra stood at them again, this time with Damien beside her, and their children playing in the courtyard behind them. The gates that had once symbolized her greatest loss now stood simply as gates, nothing more, no longer holding any power over the family that had found its way back to each other. She had been exiled for being childless. She returned with twins carrying the Alpha King's eyes, and with them, she brought a kingdom back to life.